I want to talk about what his response was when asked about his very progressive record. This is what he said. What a monster. Kids are eating and having full bellies so they can go learn, and women are making their own healthcare decisions. What do you make of his response when presented with his record and questions of what attacks and criticisms he would face from the right?
He recently made a comment that said something to the effect of somebody's socialism is just my version of friendly. For him, what he does is really he doubles down on taking from middle class, from people who are working families, and taking their wealth and then spreading it among the state. When you look at that, think about we almost have $1 billion fraud under his watch. What he's doing is taking that money from middle class families and giving it to agencies who are not being responsible with that money and wasting it among the state. So he has a couple of things that he'll point out, like free school lunches for children, things like that. But what he's ignoring is that a lot of the funding that he's taking from families and businesses is going into this fraud that's happened across the state. And there's a lot of things like that that we have to watch for. And so it's pretty disingenuous for him to throw out these few things without realizing or recognizing these shortcomings within his record as well.
Republicans are in the minority in the Minnesota Senate, but can you point to, under Governor Walz's leadership, his time as governor, any bipartisan legislative accomplishment that you're proud of that you worked with him at all or with other Democrats on?
There's been very few, actually, that we can say that we worked bipartisanly on over the last 2 years while I was leader of the Republican Party in the Senate. It's been once they got the trifecta, the House, the Senate, and the governor's office, really what they've done is they've ignored Republicans across the state. And remember, in the Minnesota Senate, we're only in the minority of one seat, and technically right now with the DFL members, Democrat members, resigning recently, we're at a tie. Very, very close in both the House and the Senate. And if they continue to ignore the needs of nearly half of the state, and leaders and other members out in conversations. Now they'll tote things like we had a bipartisan tax fix. Well, that was a tax bill that the Democrats ran in 2023 that had a lot of errors in it that we're continuing to point out throughout the legislative session. And then they realized that after the bill was passed, and then they had to go back for a correction, which we supported. So there's going to be things like that they will tout going forward. But the reality is there's been very little compromise going back and forth, especially over the last 2 years.
How do you think then his record would translate to a national stage under a Harris-Walz administration should they win in November?
What I'm very concerned about is that Governor Walz, and if they win, Vice President Walz, would be somebody that would go out and he talks a great game and he'll put it in terms that it sounds very benign on the programs that they're going to be implementing. But the reality is that he's going to be going hard to the left on all these issues. Think about things that are important to all Americans, like border security. Governor Walz, I'm sure, will put a good spin on it, but the reality is they're going to be soft on the border again and continue to keep it open in a way that endangers, the border states. Also, it builds up a lot of expense in states like Minnesota, where we have now free health care for illegal immigrants, and same with they can get driver's licenses and those sorts of things. It puts a burden on those states, but again, I think he's going to put a shine on these things, but the reality is it's going to be hard left policies.